Okay, I think we'll start the webinar because we're just at the time. And I'd like to first of all welcome you all to the webinar today. My name is Deirdre de Burca and I'm the Advocacy Coordinator with Forus. And Forus is co-hosting this webinar today with the University of Lisbon and particularly with one of its PhD researchers, Luísa Silva, who is working on civil society innovation. And she is going to speak to you a little bit later, but I'll start maybe by just letting you, introducing you very briefly to Forus. As many of you may know, Forus is a global civil society network. We're made up of 69 national development platforms and 7 regional coalitions. So we really have a very strong footprint in every region and most countries of the world. So we are very happy to be part of co-hosting this advocacy webinar today, and particularly looking at the issue of innovation, because innovation is very important for an organization if it wants to remain dynamic and flexible and able to respond to the kind of complexities that it encounters in its everyday activities. And particularly at the moment, I suppose innovation is top of our agenda because I think we're all aware, given the global pandemic we're currently living through, that everything to do with our work and even with wider society has been upended. And we're in a period of potential, change, great change, fundamental change. And because of that, I think civil society as a key actor needs to be in a position to be able to maybe rethink and reflect on the way it works and how it can work more effectively to be more impactful and to really influence the kind of changes that we're going to see happening undoubtedly over the coming months and years following this pandemic. So very happy to host the webinar here today. I know we have a combination of people from different backgrounds on the webinar. So our participants are Forus members who are members of national development platforms, but also we have researchers, we have students, we have people from a more academic and professional background. So you're all very welcome here today. And we really look forward to hearing our speakers and Anna indeed, who's working and has been very much the driver behind this webinar, talking about new approaches, tools and technology to advocacy in civil society networks and coalitions. So I'm going to hand over to Anna now to say a little bit about herself and the work she's doing, and then to introduce both of our speakers who are going to share some very useful insights into the kind of innovative advocacy work they have done within their own organizations. And we're going to ask you just to listen to the 2 speakers, and when they're finished, we're going to open up for questions, comments, and hopefully for a lively discussion about the potential for innovation in our advocacy activities. So I'll hand over to Anna now, and just to say to you that if you want, most of you are probably very familiar with Zoom, but when we open up for Q&A, if you want to either raise your hand, there's a little hand raising option on the screen in front of you to indicate that you'd like to speak. Or you can also put comments or questions into the chat box directed at everybody, and my attention will be drawn to those questions, and we'll certainly ask the speakers to respond to them in due course. So look forward to a great webinar. Over to you now, Anna, and looking forward to hearing the speakers share their knowledge and their insights with us. Thank you. Over to you, Anna.
Hi, thank you, Deirdre. I'm not going to be long because I know that we only have 1 hour and we want to leave plenty of time for questions. But as Deirdre said, I am a PhD candidate at the University of Lisbon at the Lisbon School of Economics and Management. With Forus, I am coordinating a study on innovation in civil society organizations. So we've decided to organize this series of webinars. We are having this one now about advocacy, and we will have another one later this month on the 24th of April, which will be in Spanish about peer-to-peer learning and new ways to do that. So it's in that context that we decided to organize this series of webinars. So just a quick note for the Forus members on this webinar, I will be sending you more information about this later on. So, and as Deirdre said, I think that innovation is key for civil society organizations. It has been for a while. And innovation in advocacy in particularly, it's really important in this moment, which is a moment of change, as Deirdre was saying. and where people have actually been thinking about not just how to approach the crisis differently in terms of how to advocate for the issues that are important to us, but also how to think about old issues and many of the issues that civil society organizations work on, like climate crisis or inequality or gender imbalance in this COVID-19 world. So it is a time for, and I've seen a lot of debate already, for civil society actors to define priorities, to coordinate agendas, to decide basically how they will push for change in this new context. And it's important to learn from successful advocacy experiences, but also from innovation thinking, which essentially is a way to help us navigate uncertainty. So I will, again, I don't want to take too much of our time because we want to hear our speakers. And today we have with us Princess Bazley-Bethea from InterAction, based in Washington, D.C. And we have Jen Castro from Digital Democracy, based in Montreal, Canada. So Princess joined Forus member InterAction. InterAction is the largest alliance of international NGOs and partners in the United States. So she joined them in 2017 as the manager of the Together Project, an initiative that was designed to create a hub of advocacy and solidarity for US-based NGOs. So Princess has an extensive experience in establishing partnerships with different stakeholders, identifying shared interests, and collectively responding to issues of concern. And then after Princess, we will hear from Jen Castro, who is joining us from Montreal, Canada. Jen is a community organizer and artist who is working as a program manager with Digital Democracy, a nonprofit that works directly with grassroots organizations and Indigenous communities to build tools that help them map, monitor, and share information about environmental and human rights. Jen will be sharing with us Digital Democracy's experiences using Mapeo, a GPS-based tool for community mapping with Indigenous communities in Ecuador and Peru. So these will be two very different experiences, both innovative, both in advocacy, bringing different actors together to work towards a common. So I will pass on to Princess, who will give the first 10 minutes presentation. Princess.
Great. Thank you, Deirdre and Anna. I'm just going to switch to share my screen now. Okay. All right, just to get an indicator everyone can see. Thank you. All right, thank you again, Deirdre and Anna. I'm going to be paying attention to the time so as to not go over, but I wanted to start off with some questions for thought. And these are questions that not only for this presentation, but also questions that we use when we decided to create this coalition and as we continue to grow and expand our advocacy. First question, what is the value added of being a coalition? Second question, how can we identify potential alliances? And the last question, what techniques can we use to sustain the coalition? So let's talk a little bit about who the Together Project Coalition is. We were founded in 2017, and the Together Project Coalition enables InterAction members to develop strategies and share information in response to shrinking civil society space experienced by these NGOs. We have 6 priorities within the Together Project Coalition. We focus on a positive public image, disinformation attacks and response, interfaith connections, civil society strengthening defense, de-risking and financial access issues, and material support regulations. Organizations that are a part of the Together Project Coalition experience some sort of discrimination or targeted regulations that either inhibit their ability to operate or affect their missions abroad. And we usually find that this is correlated because of their operating principles or religious faith. So our organizations on the right of the screen are founding members of the coalition. they felt like they needed to create this hub of advocacy and support and solidarity to better do their work and to better respond to shrinking civil society space. We were founded by American Relief Agency for the Horn of Africa, Islamic Relief USA, the Zakat Foundation of America, Helping Hand in Relief and Development, UMR, and of course, InterAction. Since 2017, our coalition has grown to extend to add on a new associate partner model where we've added on 5 associate partners. And we also created a working group. Our working group now has a list of over 50 organizations who join in advocacy and support around our 6 priorities. So what is the main goal of the coalition? The main goal of the coalition is to eliminate the obstacles NGOs face when delivering humanitarian and development assistance abroad. Now, I bolded and underscored obstacles because I wanted to delve into 2 of the main obstacles that the coalition prioritizes. First, disinformation attacks and response. Just to give a little bit of context of what disinformation is. Disinformation is basically the cross center of false information and information that's meant to do harm. So disinformation is both false and has the intent to harm. We find that this comes from false context, imposter content, manipulated content, and fabricated content. Oftentimes, members of the Together Project Coalition are most vulnerable to disinformation attacks and weaponizing disinformation because there are groups and blogs or pseudo think tanks who make it a part of their political agenda to identify organizations that are doing good work in various regions of the world. And they take that and they use pieces of disinformation, like linking our organizations to terrorism, financing terrorism, or other things. And they use that to try to advance their own agenda. And so I'll give you another example of how this has played out for members of the Together Project. So a few years ago, there was a coordinated disinformation campaign against an international NGO. In the US. So in the US, a congressional member went before the floor of the US Congress and put an amendment that would have ended US government funding for this international NGO. This was unprecedented at the time. We only got about 48 hours notice when this happened to respond to this member's Congress attack on this particular NGO. What we found is that the evidence that the member of Congress was using was a piece of disinformation. It was completely baseless and full of allegations, and none of it had been fact-checked. Actually, the member of Congress didn't even reach out to the named organization to ask if any of this was even true, and they didn't do their own investigation. So, like I said, we had about 48 hours. And at the bottom of the screen, you can sort of see the timeline of what we had to do in that 48 hours to defend our international NGO. So the charity reached out to the Together Project through InterAction, and they let us know, the intel that they had that this was happening in the US Congress. From there, we identified resources. We found friends also in Congress. We found notable champions, and we also started to prepare for legal recourse. Next, we started to put an action together. And a part of that action was heavily reliant on the members within InterAction. As Deirdre mentioned, InterAction is a almost 200 plus NGO alliance organization. So our members span small and large organizations, faith-based, non-faith-based, and work in almost every region and country in the world. So we reached out to these organizations and let them know that this was happening to a fellow NGO and came up with a plan. That plan included engaging policymakers in Congress, doing sign-on letters, calls, and meetings. We had over 50 organizations come to the defense of that INGO and also called that member of Congress's office, not only in Washington, D.C., where he was, but also his state that he was representing. With that pressure and also with the pressure of the community that stood in defense for this organization, that member of Congress withdrew his amendment, and we successfully thwarted that attack. One thing that I would say was a big lesson learned from that experience is solidarity means everything when you're being attacked as an NGO. So having the already built-in network and a coalition to really come to the aid of this NGO quickly was really helpful. Another lesson learned was education. And education is all about advocacy and also creating those relationships with not just your allies, but with the stakeholders who are around like policy, around these issues, so that they know what your organization is doing. And they also know about this issue of disinformation campaigns. And lastly, preparation was a huge lesson learned. So on the preparation front, we created a resource at InterAction called the Disinformation Toolkit. So the Disinformation Toolkit is actually free and it's online. And so anyone who's listening to the webinar, please feel free to go to InterAction's website and download the toolkit. You can Google it as well, it'll come up, and we wanted to provide this as not just a resource for our members, but for everyone. And the toolkit provides outside resources so that you better understand the different ways that a disinformation campaign can affect your organization. But it also includes a risk assessment tool to help organizations better prepare for when something like this happens to them. Prepare for, in terms of their communications, in terms of their security, in the field or in headquarters, and also to prepare their executive leadership in order to respond. So now I'll move on to a second obstacle that we advocate around in the coalition, which is called financial access. So one of the major impacts of financial access issues is the impact of bank de-risking. So on the left, you see an infographic, and while it's small, I'll make sure to share this with Anna so that she can give you the actual link in the PDF to this infographic. But basically what this is showing is the impact of banks when they either delay or freeze members' accounts. So when donors give money to NGOs and nonprofits, ideally those funds are put into bank accounts, and they then are transferred to programs around the world to pay for resources, salaries, operational costs, etc. But there's a very growing and a chilling effect when banks decide to de-risk for a number of reasons. And when they de-risk, they either delay those funds from being transferred to different areas, or they freeze accounts, or banks have actually closed accounts of members or refused to start new accounts. And when that happens, the impact is not just chilling on the NGOs, but it also affects programs in the ground, because now programs can't be funded, salaries can't be paid, hospitals and schools are closed, etc. So we've had a number of members of the Together Project Coalition that have experienced this to an alarming rate, having as many as 7 or more banks either refuse their accounts or close their accounts. And this is very much a technical issue, but that affects not just NGOs, but affects many industries and many businesses. But why we care about it as a coalition is because we find that it has a most chilling effect for vulnerable organizations. And when I say vulnerable, I mean organizations that are either working in regions of the world that might be in conflict, or Muslim faith-based groups, or even sometimes just depending on what the name of your organization is. For example, if you have Syria in the name of your organization, we find that it can create a delay. And we think that that is definitely unfair and not to the benefit of anyone's agenda. And so we started to work around this issue in a couple of different ways. One, to the right, we joined a stakeholder dialogue on de-risking. This dialogue was organized by the World Bank, ACAMS, and we participated in a number of meetings in the US and The Hague to combat this issue, not just in the US, but globally. And we also became members of Charity and Security Network. And the Charity and Security Network very much does focus on these issues of the intersection of where charities have issues with national security, like bank de-risking, deplatforming, and lawfare attacks. This is great examples of when there's an issue that's so large and so complex that we needed to join other alliances and engage with other alliances to better combat these issues. Also, we work on this, when we're working on these issues, we do a lot of education meetings, especially around bank de-risking. Education and advocacy are priorities for the Together Project. We go in and we try to foster a better understanding for the policymakers so that they understand just what these laws and these regulations do to our organizations and how they inhibit our work, and also inhibit the US to do a major part of its commitment, which is provide humanitarian and development assistance abroad. The Together Project actually created a dedicated advocacy team to strategize around these issues. Each year, we see about 30 to 40 members of Congress. On the left-hand side, those are the list of members that we saw in 2019. So since 2017, we have been engaging with these members on these issues regularly. And we find that it is the education of sitting down with these staffers and letting them know just exactly what these NGOs do in the field and how these regulations affect that work that has had the biggest amount of change and progress for our efforts and priorities.
Right, Princess,
so
reminder about time.
Okay, lastly, moving ahead, the other project is looking forward to working in the issues of disinformation and discrimination and continuing NGO solidarity and advocacy. We value solidarity in the Together Project, and we are very fortunate to have the backing of all InterAction members and stakeholders across the Together Project to advocate for change. And I'll close with that, and thank you for the opportunity to share, and I look forward to getting questions.
Thank you so much, Princess. Jen, would you like to go?
Yes, that'd be great. And yeah, first, just my name is Jen Castro, and I'm super grateful for you to join us all today. And I'm thrilled to be part of Digital Democracy, joined a few years ago as the program coordinator who does field work in Peru. Now, before I joined the team, Digital Democracy did a pivot from human rights related issues that could be improved by the use of technology to responding more to climate change in a way that centered human experiences. And currently we're focused on climate and environmental justice for Indigenous communities and their autonomy as active participants in defense of their own territories. So I'm just gonna share my screen. So this here is my last trip to Peru, which was in November. I traveled with my teammates to deliver a mapping and monitoring tool set that we have created called Mapeo. Now these people are autonomously organized community monitors from a few different federations in northern Peru. And what they've been doing is documenting evidence of oil spills and ineffective remediation since about 2006 in the Amazon, which is obviously a really key issue when it comes to climate justice. So I'm just going to do a little bit of a show and tell here. And
entonces, kas na kaushpan, lingich kampoma. Mas tipo, mais ponto surgunchi, e mas eu quero de surgunchi. Aqui, toma. Nem tem escala na. Já te conheci para ele. Entonces, bueno, porque mañana botadera, pues, partancia botadera nitista. E que formulário já se consciente que não são da China tá mais tipo foto, quando tomar foto, tomar su foto, ¿tá? Entonces, prácticamente ya wakacya riskan, ya mais sensível. Entonces, kad nya riskan itu karena komunikasi itu ya canggihnya. Pak tadi pagi itu kad ni temo kad stop kilo stop ya.
And I'll just highlight those logos there. So I'm going to turn back to this guy. So in addition to doing software development and presentations like this one, what we provide is, oh dear, sorry, this is playing when it should, I'll just do it old school. What we provide is technical accompaniment to our local partners. And in this particular case, these local partners are representations from 4 different cuencas, 3 different indigenous groups aligned called Quinamut. And what they've been doing is organizing advocacy platforms that have been fighting for proper consultation and accountability for the health and environmental issues that they've been forced to live with over 4 decades of oil extraction in their territories. The community monitors are collecting evidence for the purpose of sharing knowledges about the industrial activities within their communities, like if there's mercury or a spill upriver, and also to deliver the evidence to the Peruvian authorities who are managing the environmental assessment and of resource industries. And so because of the history of Peru and its economic dependency on oil extraction, this is actually a pretty conflictual relationship. And so it's really important that these evidences are clear and uncontested. So why were we so excited about bringing Mapeo mobile to northern Peru? Well, it's a specific use case. They're in an extremely remote region. It takes a lot of time and resources for visiting organizations and institutions or authorities to reach these areas to collect information or verify when there's any incidences. And when they do those trips, often they'll take that data away from the territory when they return back to their institutions. In Mapeo, the data collected can be viewed over an offline map showing communities, giving communities a lot more power to see what is happening in their area and the region, and also to assess the situation to create more strategy in response to incidences that occur. We wanted the information that was being collected to be visible by the monitors so that data stays in the community. And previous to this, a lot of the tools that have been available for community monitoring have often been like a form submission that when you hit send, you actually never see the answers ever again. So what was happening is monitors were submitting using other tools, and then they would lose the information and not be able to return to the communities with some of the evidence that they had collected. Internet is mostly inaccessible in this part of the world and many parts of the world where there's indigenous populations. And when it is available, it's usually pretty unstable and you can't even upload photos really. So sending evidence to authorities from the remote regions is quite difficult. So with Mapeo, data is transferred without the internet. So we use a peer-to-peer sharing technology that we've been developing. And it's shared over a Wi-Fi signal. And this can be done over any router, even a phone as a hotspot. And it works to transfer data like a bridge, forming a local wireless network. Even if the router is connected to the internet, the data actually doesn't travel into the internet under the ocean, under the cables in a server somewhere else. It stays right in the area. So data being in its place and secure is one of the key features of the application. So what this means is that every device is its own server, and its users who are working on the project will actually all equally share the information, completely transforming how data and information is used to leverage power in their communities. Mapeo was also designed to be quite intuitive, as you saw from the video, which reduces a lot of need for extensive training, as other tools like ArcGIS or other more institutional software has been developed. And so this needs less training and a quick adaptation. And the information design for each project is completely customizable, inviting possibilities for Indigenous languages to be included, or even local terminology, which can make things a lot easier for folks of different literacy or different languages. So how did we get to this point? Well, we have a lot of partners. We do a lot of active collaboration with groups in multiple countries, and I'll show you a map a little bit later, but it's with them that we have been able to innovate tools that are specifically useful to marginalized Indigenous populations dealing with land issues. So one of the other project sites I work with is in the Amarakaeri Reserve in southern Peru. So Eka Amarakaeri is a different project altogether. They've got a different strategy and a platform, but they're doing the same kind of work of defending their territories in the Amazon. They've been working collaboratively with the government since they have active relationship with the park rangers. And what they're challenging is the illegal activities that are happening in their areas, including illegal mining, logging, and other illicit industries that often impact the Amazon. So what we're doing is we're working very closely with them. They have more ready access to the internet, which makes them really ideal collaborators. And we're getting a lot of firsthand experience. So what we've been able to do is bring the original prototype, test it out in the field. We had a prototype from June 2018 that we launched there. And with their team, we've been able to identify features that are more useful for them in their contexts and priorities that address their strategic needs, as well as the needs of their community monitors. We take their feedback, we observe what tasks are difficult, and we execute and pivot our technology according to whatever the needs are. And we've been doing this kind of active collaboration on developing Mapeo with a number of partners. As you can see, a really long list of amazing contributors from Ecuador, Colombia, and Peru and Guyana. And what this has really meant is we've been developing a system that has actually been an evolution. So Mapeo Mobile was actually an extension project from the original base project Mapeo, which is now called Mapeo Desktop. And that was actually a seeded project with amazing collaborators from Ecuador, the Guarani. So about 5 years ago, the Guarani, who are part of Alianza Sebo, wanted to make a map showing that their territory was filled with valuable resources like foods, materials, and medicines, as a way to challenge the Ecuadorian government's efforts to sell off blocks for their oil auctions, if you remember the campaigns around the Yasuni. And so international oil exploitation was one of the big pressures, and Guarani wanted evidence to be able to prove that what they had there was key and critical for their survival. So since that original Guarani mapping project had launched, we've been able to help build tools, Mapeo, that have been centering easy to use software that worked offline, that could be edited right in the villages by members of the community, with elders and youth actively participating in the process, carrying a lot of new community knowledge that typical maps don't carry. And the Guarani mapping team are the themselves the authors of the content of the map. They use their own language and their own drawings, even in the icons, and their own understanding of territory to execute and envision the project. In this picture in the bottom, you'll see this is Opie, and on the left corner, you'll see a very, very long list legend. Those are all individually identified key value pieces that the Guarani wanted to make sure were mapped in the territory. So as the needs and similarities emerged from different partners, from different mapping and community monitoring projects for the last few years, we've seen this evolution from project to project with the application. Our efforts to make Mapeo easy to use and as customizable as possible is facilitated by the way we work as a technical organization. We like to center autonomy as a principle to ensure that we're giving our partners and other users the power to hold and manage their own data through our process, and offer tools that are free, they're open source, which is key to making sure that communities in need actually are able to use valuable tools. We make sure that the technological collaboration is completely participatory, and we create solutions where profit-based tech industry really doesn't try to address needs. So that is our particular focus in our work. To close, innovation is a practice for us, now more than ever especially, and the ability to adapt to new and unaddressed needs is quite critical. I'm sure there'll be questions about that coming up. Thank you so much for listening.
Great. So I'd like to thank both the speakers for really interesting presentations. I mean, it seems to me that Princess was really highlighting the importance of solidarity and collaboration to overcome disinformation and misrepresentation where civil society and its activities are concerned. And our second speaker, Jenny, was really talking about, I suppose, the potential for innovative digital technologies to be very effective in supporting civil society's activities, even in contexts where there's little or no internet. So I think we'll have really hopefully stimulated questions and comments from participants in the webinar. So at this point, maybe I would like to open up for questions or comments. And again, just to remind you that you have a small device or an option to raise your hand if you want to make a comment, or also to put a comment in the chat box. I know Anna will very kindly help me with any overlook in the chat box. So in terms of starting, can we see if there's anybody who has indicated that they'd like to ask a question? So Anna, can you help me there and let me know if there's anyone that you see? I don't personally see any hands raised at the moment, but maybe there's somebody who would like to.
We have Emily Cialdi who wants to talk. Okay,
so over to Emily, is it?
Emmeline Cialdi.
Emmeline Cial. So Ciala, one of our members from the Regional Coalition in the Pacific, Piango. So Emmeline, over to you.
Thank you, and thank you for the two presentation. My question is to the democracy, digital democracy, Jenny. I just find your presentation quite interesting, and I'm just reflecting on how such a tool can be used now that we have, the COVID-19 is being now locked down our communities from face-to-face outreach program, for example. In our region, that's an issue that we are currently facing. You have any plan on how your work could be used in this environment now?
Yeah, actually, this has been. I happened to be on vacation in Guatemala when all the airports shut down. So while I was on vacation, and isolated in a new space, I was definitely thinking about how our tool could be used and adapted to respond to needs of different people who are impacted in different ways by COVID-19. For our partners specifically, since they've already had the tool in place and some of them already have community monitoring set, it would be as easy from the implementation standpoint as adjusting the presets on the phone, so that any relevant information could be transmitted from within the community around maybe resources that are needed or gaps. And then of course the security and the nature of maybe smaller remote communities of considering whether it's safe to highlight or identify when there's been an outbreak in a region. It comes with some responsibility. So each community has to, and leaders have to define for themselves what is safe or appropriate. Now with the peer-to-peer stuff, it actually requires you to be in the same space as somebody. And so that really does transform things in terms of extremely remote communities that might not be able to, they might be able to share within their community some information, but how do they get information out to other areas if they've already got blockades? And so an additional feature that we've been working on is Mapeo Web, which is basically opening a web service so that a device could sync then to a web service and then back down to another user within the same project. Now this was always in our plan, but the need for it has, I think, shifted really dramatically. And we're gonna have to concentrate on figuring out if there's support to help us advance the development of the security. So we can get this working technically on a basic level, but right now we've got a security issue. We wanna have end-to-end encryption between the two spots. So this is an area that we definitely wanna expand on, but our current funding doesn't actually address those needs because this need emerged way sooner than we anticipated. But it's definitely on our minds.
Great, thanks, Jenny. Is there anybody else who'd like to make a comment, put a question? I see something here from Dennis. Thank you very much for the presentations. To Princess, you have mentioned that solidarity is the key. By that, how do you decide agreed value and grow the solidarity amongst the coalitions, especially if there's limited resources such as funding? So over to you maybe to try and respond to that.
Thank you, Denisa. Yes, that can be a challenge. One thing is that with the Together Project Coalition, these members came together and identified the issue for themselves and came to InterAction to be the platform. And so I think that has worked well in the sense that there was agreed upon, they're already agreed upon that these issues, these priorities were of concern to them, and they wanted to pull their resources together and while also finding others, financial resources together, also while finding other financial resources to address these issues, just because it had become so chilling and so threatening to their operations. And I think that each year we still try to identify that there is still concern around the same amount of issues. And, for at least 3 years, and, I can imagine, disinformation and financial access issues or, these regulations changing, that it's the issues that bring everyone together around the solidarity and trying to solve those issues. So there hasn't been hasn't been too hard to bring the coalition together or to continue even in the face of limited resources, because the not doing so is going to be critical to your work. Not being able to coordinate and collaborate and respond together is detrimental to everyone.
Great, thanks very much, Princess, for that. I see another question here from Hema to Jen. Excellent empowering tool for communities. Congrats. Could you give examples of how communities made use of the data to defend their rights and environment? Do government institutions accept the data?
Actually, yeah, it's been pretty amazing to see how powerful the territory mapping has been. Now, the Waterni could foresee that the control of their territory and being able to advocate for its purpose was going to be critical. What we didn't realize was that the territory map was used as a key piece of evidence in their challenge of the Ecuadorians' government's consultation process. So basically the Waterni had fought and challenged the government, saying that it was unconstitutional and it didn't follow their rights, and basically showed, in addition to evidence of a kind of bribery and creating false consultations in communities, also showed that the community was actively organizing and talking about the territory and wasn't ignorant to the issues going on, and that it was very active and purposeful manipulation of resources by the consultors to misinform and get false consultation getting approval. So what this meant was that the Ecuadorian government actually got their ability to auction off that territory completely thrown out last year. I think in April is when they started those court cases. And there's been a number of appeals since by the Ecuadorian government to say that, yes, it was still right consultation, and the case that the Guarani had won was false. But in every single layer since, the Guarani keep winning this fight. And if you look it up online, it's a pretty amazing story.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, that's very inspiring and encouraging to hear stories like that. Anybody else? I don't see any other questions or comments in the chat box. If not, I might ask a very quick question myself, maybe to Princess. So Jen's presentation obviously has been all about the very effective use of online and digital technology in the kind of work that is being supported at the local level. And I'm just wondering, in your activities, your initiative, any online technologies or any digital means that help to support and enhance the work of the initiative?
It's a good question. I think what I would say is that our members rely heavily on these aspects of innovative digital work, especially as we try to combat disinformation, misinformation. And one of the main ways of doing that is the media literacy and also the legitimacy and the accuracy of news. And so while the coalition itself isn't focused on maybe the digital aspect, we work with our members who are creating those same sort of avenues of either software, of learning tools, so that citizens are better able to identify when a piece of work is misinformation or disinformation. Also, when we are looking at this network that is putting out misinformation, disinformation, this same sort of echo chamber of bloggers and pseudo think tanks and etc. We do pay some attention to, who's retweeting them, who's reblogging them, paying attention to the network in that aspect and how it's, whether it's online or whether it is print, those sort of pieces. And so more so the output is where we're at and seeing, where those disinformation is coming out of. But I think it is very important to have these tools that create accuracy, that fact check, that do a lot of the learning tools for folks to be more media literate.
Great, thanks, Princess. So I see one more question here from, please forgive my pronunciation, but Chiminpa, I think it is. Thanks for the presentations. To Jen, can you talk about how was the initial level of knowledge of the communities about their rights, and was it an issue to convince them to those rights and take it to the advocacy level?
Yeah, and that's a really fantastic line of questioning, because it really is, as from the various sites that I've been able to visit, it's been eminently clear that people know what's going on. They know that there's invasions, or they know that there's maybe legal forces that are impeding on their territories. So the talk about their territory and the land use and who is there, who is accessing things, is a constant there. So when meetings are organized by local advocacy groups that are there, in the case of Ecuador, it's Alianza Sebo in partnership with Amazon Frontlines, which is the international sibling organization, that they coexist and actually co-work in the same space. They're able to organize meetings and information sharing. I actually got to attend what was called a Toxi tour, inviting about 4 of the different indigenous groups all together to see the various threats that impact certain groups and not others. So some folks who had traveled maybe 3 days out of pristine Amazon got to see what a palm plantation looked like and how that affected the ecology, and also got to see oil spill sites for the first time in their lives. And they got to take that knowledge and return back to the communities to disseminate that information. So really it's about the opportunity for those folks to meet and exchange. And that happens in basically all the projects. Local organizers and strategists have been using education and talking and assemblies to make sure that people are informed about what's going on in terms of convincing people to be interested. They've always been interested. It's just the access to information that is key, and which is why Mapeo having actual visible evidence be in communities and be able to be shared is really critical for accelerating that transmission of knowledge. I think you're on mute, Deirdre.
Yeah, I don't see anybody else who's indicating that they wish to speak or to ask a question at the moment. And if not, I will hand back to Anna, who is going to, and I mean, I think the purpose of today's webinar and the discussion here is really to start stimulating our thinking about introducing greater innovation into our advocacy. And I know this is a subject that Anna is passionately interested in and doing a lot of work on through the University of Lisbon. So Anna, maybe you could wrap up for us and just give us some ideas about where this line of work may go and some of the things you're planning over the coming months. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Deirdre. Yeah, and thank you to Princess and to Jen and to all the participants, because I think that both presentations and the questions have highlighted a lot of the common issues that we come across when we are looking at stimulating innovation and innovative thinking in organizations. So a lot of issues around participation, who is participating and who is initiating the processes. And this is key also for advocacy, for every advocacy initiative, as both Jen and Princess have noted. So Princess, from her perspective, where organizations kind of get together around a very pressing issue and then define a strategy to go about it, and then Jen talking about how communities who are close to an issue need to be engaged in the development of a tool that is actually useful for them and adapted to the actual circumstances. The other thing that I would like to highlight, I think both again, both in the presentations and in the questions came across very strongly, is the engagement with institutions at various levels. So it's not that both, it's not that both the solutions were developed and kind of acted on their own. It's not that a technology was developed and then on its own kind of was, gave fruit, but it is that the technologies and the engagement were acted upon with the key stakeholders and kind of pushing those leverages that would lead on to change and solidarity among, not just among the organizations that the coalition and the project that Princess presented, but obviously around the initiative that Jen presented, both at local level and then kind of at the international network level, were both very present. So I would just like to highlight that link that sometimes kind of is lost in the stories of when we're talking about innovation, because we maybe tend to think just development of new tools or new technologies. And it's not just that. The processes are important. The fact that the communities need to be involved, and that the issues need to be tackled in a strong collaborative way, as both presenters have spoken about. So yeah. So on that note, I would like to thank you all again, and again, tell you that we will be organizing another webinar on the 24th of April, and we will forward information to all of you. That one will be more around peer-to-peer learning, which is a topic that is also important for networks of civil society organizations. And you have my contact details. Deirdre, I don't know if you want to say anything else about what will follow up after the webinar.
Maybe just to say, Anna, thanks very much for that, that I think you're also circulating a survey. So that's something that we'll be doing within Forus, helping to disseminate that survey. So really trying to sort of capture the experiences of our members in terms of trying to innovate where their advocacy is concerned, and maybe picking up some ideas about good practice and maybe you know, areas where people haven't had much success. So we'll certainly be circulating that, and it is something we'd like to commit ourselves to as a network. Forus is very interested in, you know, responding, and we are quite an innovative network in ourselves. We would like to continue to be, you know, at the cutting edge. We'd like to continue innovating, because many of the problems, particularly as a global network, that civil society is dealing with are quite complex and multi-level, and we need to keep thinking outside the box all the time to try and make sure that we really are addressing the issues in as effective a way as we can. So we're very happy to commit ourselves to do that. So I hope that the partnership between the University of Lisbon and Forus will continue. And if any of our members or anybody else on the call would like to get in contact with us with ideas or suggestions or feedback on the whole issue of innovation in advocacy, we'd be very happy. And I certainly personally would be very happy to receive them. So I'm just keeping an eye on the chat box here to make sure that there's nothing else, but I think people are very appreciative, and I'd like to thank both our speakers in particular and Anna for organising and helping to drive this webinar, and just to say that we hope to have more of these webinars in the future. So thank you to all the participants also for participating, for the interesting questions, and we look forward to speaking to you again at some stage in the not too distant future.